How's everybody doing today? Woo! AWS, right? You guys just came here to sit down. I know that, right? Because I don't know if you're like me. I'm tired. So I want to kick it off. Like we enabled this building digital resilience with unified security and observability. What we really wanted to call it was two fat guys and an idea, but they wouldn't let us do that for some reason.
I thought it was two good-looking guys.
That's right. Like we're sexy like Austin Powers, right? But anyway, I want to say thank you for everybody showing up here. Hopefully you'll get something out of it, and we'll kick this off. So. Real quickly, my name is Tony Pierce. I'm one of the field CTOs at Splunk. You guys can look me up. I'm not going to go in. Most of my background is Department of Defense, and I did a little thing as a consultant, but my specialty is basically focusing on cybersecurity and resilience around. So I spent a lot of time with like Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies.
Thank you, Tony. My name is Michael Guccia. I lead the security advisory team for North America for Splunk. Been at Splunk for about 3 years, but most of my career I spent on the practitioner side, building either security programs or operational programs. Last stop before joining the dark side, as some of my friends and colleagues like to say, I was senior vice president at MasterCard, where I ran their core operations. So I was responsible for the $6.5 trillion a year network, security, and operations. Also spent time at Express Scripts and at a small healthcare system, about a $6 billion integrated health delivery network. Sisters of Mercy in St. Louis. So we're really excited to be here with you today and share with you some of our stories around resilience. When we talk about Splunk, these are some of the speeds and feeds by Splunk, but I'm going to just address the elephant in the room. Yes, a couple months ago, it was announced we were being acquired by Cisco. We are really thrilled about that announcement. Sometime in 2024, it's scheduled to close, and we're excited to be coming back next year, bigger, faster, and stronger. So looking forward to joining the ranks of Cisco. But it really doesn't change the mission that we have at Splunk, and that's all about the data. What we do at Splunk is we're a data analytics platform, and then we use a whole bunch of other really great technology to address different workloads and use cases for our customers. One of the things that our customers, you guys have seen or have experienced, is a ever-changing global threat landscape. I mean, before COVID hit, we were all going to the office, right? Almost no remote work. We had most of our workloads, or at least some of our workloads, were on-prem. Some were moving to the cloud in some hybrid format. But the world is changing. And what I found is companies that have the most resilient data systems, both for security and observability, are the ones that thrive in that changing environment. They're able to react. They're able to send people home on a dime. They're able to move the workloads to the cloud and do so in a secure way and not impact their operations. So when we talk about resilience, we're really talking about the whole picture. Share with you a quick story. When I was at MasterCard, one of the last things I did was create what we called a technical risk radar. This was a tool we used to show the board of directors what were the biggest risks to operating our operations around the globe. And we were really proud of this. It was a beautiful picture. We had a whole bunch of underlying data and information for the board explaining why that was our top 10, 11, 12 risks. And we presented it to the board of directors, and one of the board members asked me, Michael, why isn't GDPR up on that list? And of course I responded, that's a law. It's more compliance and legal. And he said, au contraire, GDPR has data residency requirements and a whole bunch of technical requirements that could absolutely impact our ability to operate throughout Europe. And he was right. And what I realized was board of directors aren't looking for us just to stop the threats, the threat actors, the hackers, the ransomware. They're asking us to build IT systems that are resilient, right? Because they want to understand what the risk is to their ongoing business operations. And so in that case, it really taught me that this concept was about resiliency and what the board is actually looking for. So at Splunk, if you think about how we built our platform, it's all about the data. Splunk's secret sauce is the ability to get data into a platform, a data analytics platform, and then execute a whole bunch of workloads against that same set of data. You notice here you see security and observability at the top. Those are our two big areas, but we also do things like fraud. We also can do things like financial crime. That data is so rich, OT security, and on and on and on. The idea is bring the data in once and then leverage that platform and leverage that data over and over. I'll tell you one quick mantra that I have, and that is, you all have data in your environments. Data is today's digital currency. Data is one of two things. It's either an asset or it's a liability. And what we strive to do for our customers is make sure they're getting the most value out of that data as possible.
Like one of the things is like a lot of times people don't realize this. Back in the day, we used to talk about cybersecurity. I've been doing cybersecurity for 30 years, 30 plus years. I started hacking when I was like 13. I spent most of my time in the Department of Defense doing some unique things for the government. And when we think about it, I said everything is data, so everything is security. Right? And so being able to take that end to end, what I like to call it the path of the packet, is understanding how it goes through. Like for Splunk, one of the reasons why I came over to Splunk, I've been here for about 11 months, was that I used Splunk in a way to get that visibility. I knew I couldn't defend anything if I didn't see it first, right? You know, we always have to say, hey, you know, we as cyber guys, we're all like, oh, send me everything, right? But everything has a cost, and everything has, there is a tipping point when you get too much data where you can't refine it. So time to detection, time to mitigation tends to be hurt. And so when you start thinking about it, is when we look at our platform, I said, well, like, I really wanted to do visibility first. I wanted to see everything, but I wanted to define that data. And also, when you think about resilience, true resilience is bending. There's no company or anybody out there that's never going to get hacked, right? It's just not going to happen. Everybody is under threat. It's a battlefield, right? And so the key to resilience is to be able to bend and then be able to come back and recover. Like the time when like ransomware, everybody talks about ransomware attacks. Once ransomware is already activated, it's too late. All right, so being able to respond in a certain way, but the only way you respond is to be able to create end-to-end visibility depending on how the attack is. So that's I tell people, like, Splunk is nothing more than a platform that answers questions and provides stability. How do we do that? All right, this is where a lot of times people forget is the planning phase, the strategic. I always break everything up. I'm prior military, I'm retired, so I kind of think in that way because I think about like the warfighter, and I think that in cyber, it's a cyber battlefield. And so everything is strategic, tactical, and to me is operational. And so a lot of times what we do is we want to be strategic. We want to be able to mount to a framework. I like to use an SCSF because it answers a lot of questions. Here at Splunk, we actually have a compliance app where it's free. You can download it, and as long as you have a good CIM mapping, you can do a lot of your compliance, right? I call it compliance over time, not a moment in time, right? But it feeds in by tactical outcomes. Again, we talked about earlier saying, hey, from cyber, send me everything, right? But everything is not always, we forget the idea of defense in depth. And so being able to be tactical and understanding that data as it flows through to get your time to detection, time to mitigation down pat, right? And everything feeds into operation. Understanding what business critical, like a lot of times I'll tell, when I go and I talk to, a lot of times I talk to a lot of CISOs and CTOs, I was like, hey, that's a partnership between you two, right? The CTO organization controls the data. They're the infrastructure. CISO is the analyst. They are the receivers of the data. So, but everything feeds to operations. And a lot of times I'll just ask, like, what is business critical? And you wouldn't believe how many times that they don't know what that is, all right? Because the cyber guys do first in, first out. Well, being able to define that and do that data classification and understanding that.
Just to add to that, you look at this. This is the strategy. You have strategic outcomes, tactical outcomes, and operational outcomes. What I'll tell you is, and I can't believe other vendors are cringing right now. Products don't solve your problems. Let's just be very clear. It's how you operationalize technology that solves your problems, right? So a lot of times you'll see companies telling you, hey, we're going to solve your problems if you buy our product. Understand the hardest thing to do is operationalizing that technology in an effective way in your operations. So when you see down here, you have to get to operational outcomes. Otherwise, what do you have? You have shelfware. Go ahead.
Now, how do we do that though, right? You need to get everything into I know a lot of the marketing buzz is like, oh, a single pane of glass, but it really is like that. How do I got to get into one platform because I need to collate and I need to aggregate the knowledge, right? One thing about we do at Splunk is we talk to just about anything. It's pretty simple. Time to value is pretty solid. But understanding, and I kind of like to use the NIST model. Again, we're all a product of our society. I came from the government. I like NIST just because it's simple, a way of simplifying a complicated thing. But like compliance over time, governance. So you guys all seen that NIST has changed. You know, you have the 5 now, right? Governance is in there. Recover, time to mitigation, time to detect, time to isolate, and time to identify. All those are those are all things, but the only way you can do that is data first, right? You have to understand your data. And one of the things that I liked about Splunk I've been around a long time, is when I started bringing it in for the government, was I needed something that talks to a lot of custom applications. It talks to just about anything. And bringing it in so I can collate that in there, because again, for us, for the Department of Defense, it's all about the warfighter, right? Next slide. Now, how did we do that, though? Right? And then one of the things I did is I built this pyramid to kind of help understand all that, right? So when you think about governance, like I'll be honest, I'm a cyber guy. It took me forever to talk to the audit guys because they drive me insane. And compliance, right? I want to focus on threat, but it took me forever to understand hey, I need to make them part of my conversation because by getting them involved, it simplifies my outcomes, right? If I get them involved during what I call the cyber playing field, it's easier on the end. I don't have to stop what I'm doing to answer their questions. So being able to bring that in, also defining the roles and responsibilities, it's all part of resilience. I design a lot of fusion centers and SOCs for, that's kind of like what we do from an advisory. And one of the things I'm like, you have to understand the roles and responsibilities. Like network guys thinking a totally different way than an IT guy. Cyber guys thinking a totally different. Back in the day, we used to say, hey, used to be a generalist, right? In cyber, you kind of knew the entire path of the packet. You knew defense in depth. But data has grown so much, and our companies have grown so much, you have to start being more niched and understanding the data. But you have to get it all into a consolidated platform. And then also, I need to get more predictive. What a lot of times I see is that we're spending a lot of time looking at the known and not focusing on the unknown. And the unknown is where the bad things happen. But we're spending so much time on the known because we haven't defined it, we haven't tagged it, we haven't classified it. And so a lot of times when I go in and I talk to them, I say, in resilience, you got to understand your applications, you got to understand your data type, and you got to get into a platform so that, because let's be honest, people, most organizations are siloed. They don't talk to each other. And I always say, people don't talk to each other, but tools do. So I use tools to facilitate communication. And so this is kind of how we've done it.
So the second part of the resiliency framework pyramid is this idea of security by design. My favorite terms I hear in the industry are things like secure DevOps. And I'm like, you've already failed. It's not security applied to DevOps. Security needs to be built into DevOps, right? The reality is, if you're not checking the code as you build the code, you're absolutely going to miss it. Or it's going to be the ninth hour and you have to deploy code and you found a vulnerability, but hey, we can't turn the business off. This is a capability we need for Christmas or Black Friday. So security by design is absolutely critical. It starts with network security. It's an application security. It's got to be built into the code that you build. And of course, endpoint and device security is key. So when we talk about security, it can never be an afterthought. If it's a bolt-on or an afterthought, then it's already done. You're going to be fighting uphill the rest of the way and probably losing the battle 9 times out of 10.
So one of the things that I like to tell, a lot of times we measure resilience by vulnerability, right? You ever seen those big, long reports that the vulnerability scanners give you, 20 pages? Nobody has time to read all that crap. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't say crap because I'm going live here. But one of the things I tell is a functional result. I was like, bring in your vulnerability scanner data, create a dashboard. Something very simple. Create a dashboard, bring in your vulnerability data, and bounce it off of your IPAM. Right? Understanding your threat landscaping. And then now, by defining that, you actually can save a little bit of money because a lot of times you're cleaning up the white noise and you're focusing on the data nets, the stuff that you actually can do. Because the rule of thumb is if you try to patch everything, You patch nothing, right? Because you just can't do it, right? Our networks are so large now, right? And so by bringing those two in, now you have your threat landscaping and you have your vulnerability. What am I scanning and what is my threat landscape? And then you bring in that patch data. Like a lot of times people use SSEM, they use Endpoint Manager, there's BigFix, there's all these different data, but a lot of times people don't look at what was not patched. So bringing all that stuff in will actually addresses risk. So you can reduce risk. You can never reduce threat. You can always reduce risk, though, by implementing different controls, right? Understanding, like a lot of us in this room are practitioners. Remember Log4j and everything, the world stopped, right? And everybody's like, oh, you need to go address that. And then that was a great example of where cyber and IT have to work together for a common result. Right? What was the most important that I needed to do first, right? And that's part of that resilience, understanding that CVE data and doing what needs to be done, which is bringing in that threat intelligence to be proactive, not reactive. And when you start thinking about IAM and third-party trust, like a lot of our companies were so integrated with other people. Like think of it, the SolarWinds hack, like that was just a third party. They used a third party to be able to, and it affected the world. Anybody who had SolarWinds, we all know it. And now I think the big thing in the news now is that CISO is, for the first time in history, a CISO is now being held accountable for, they're being sued. Right? And so, but understanding that data, but you can't do that unless you bring the data in and understand what is the risk and where it is and review some of that. And then the key to when you get to the maturity model is automation, right? Being able to automate a lot of this stuff is key. But you can't, I've seen, I do a lot of incident response, and I've seen where people have automated too early. And the rule of thumb in SOC is if it's automated, I'm not looking at it. Right? But so you haven't defined the data, so you automate too early, and then something slips through. Right? Hackers know your network, is that they're in there. And so being able to automate what you need to do, but that's the maturity level. Next slide.
And actually, the reality is that SOCs face, if you're all in or touch security operations, you know that the volume of incidents, the volume of tickets, the volume of whatever continues going up exponentially. So the only way to address that is through automation. Because have you ever met a CISO that told you he had unlimited budget for FTEs?
No, never.
I don't think anybody here, raise your hand if you have unlimited budget. So the reality is, how do you address it? You have to address it through automation. So automation is absolutely a key to any resiliency program that you put in place in your organization. And then the next part of the pyramid is this resiliency by design. So we talked about security by design, but the reality is we can no longer operate in silos. One of the things I did at MasterCard was I actually took somebody from the SOC and put them in the NOC. Why was that? So they had visibility. Because there was never an incident that was occurring that if it was a NOC issue, the SOC was chasing its tail for hours trying to figure out what the problem was, or vice versa. If there's a security incident, the Network Operations Center was chasing its tail. So the reality is these two organizations, these two functions can't operate wholly independent. They still need to be independent for operations perspectives, but the reality is they can't be independent. So resiliency isn't just a security term anymore. It's actually an IT term that really calls to the fact that resiliency needs to be built in across. So you see a couple of the bullet points here: integrated case and ticket system management. So they have visibility across both IT ops and security. Integrated threat intel, and threat intel is absolutely key to being able to defend against current threat actors that are out there. And then this notion of passive defense is just doesn't work, right? So we're talking about having active defense, active search with the right skill set to find the threat actors that are operating in your environment in a near real-time fashion.
Like one of the things I want to, go back for 1 minute, please. One of the things I really want to get into this is I worked a case one time where I got brought in for incident response, and what we found was, like in cyber, in the old school cyber is like, hey, I'm isolated, I have my own little world, and I kind of tell everybody, well, hey, you got a problem. But what was happening is they had their case management system separated from their ticketing system. And so all the engineers were using, their ticketing system, and then you had the case management. And so they got hit by a ransomware attack. And what was happening is the analyst, it took him 12 to 15 minutes to basically build take stuff from the case management system and get it into the ticketing system to get the engineer. Because the engineer says, hey, look, I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to isolate India or whatever without a ticket, all right? Because he's looking at his job. Well, what happened is while that was happening, ransomware was going through their network. And when we did the review, we realized that they had seen it, but they didn't have an integrated system. And so by the time that they were actually getting the engineer to isolation, right, and to be able to isolate it, they had already been pawned. Right? And so having that integrated system is a resilience. And a lot of times we talk about threat intelligence, and we think about threat intelligence as reactive, and it's not. It should be proactive. By getting that into your data analytics platform or in your SIM or whatever you want to call it, you're allowed to collate that data and you can get ahead of it. A lot of times threat intel has a lot of that information already. They already know what the malicious domains are. If you think about ransomware, a lot of those that's a C2 activated exploit. And so being able to go in and actually saying, hey, look, these domains are already bad, why don't I just block by default, right? And being able to get that threat in there, and also it gives the analyst the ability to say, oh, wait a minute, if this is known as a known bad, it allows me to go faster. All right, again, there's only two metrics in cyber, time to detection, time to mitigation. And then also understanding the skill set, right? And you guys read the news just like I do. There's a huge misplacement, where you have beginning cyber, and then you have the guys at the top of the pyramid, and then we have a problem in the middle, all right? Around training, right? But understand the right skill set to the right role to the right outcome. Right? When you start building out your SOCs, that's part of it. It's all about people, process, and technology. Right? Technology is just part of it. It's only as good as the people that know how to configure it and make it work. All right? And so when I think about the resilience part, I tell people, what are your skill sets? Because the fact is, a lot of times people do SOCs or fusion centers, and they say, oh, you're in everything. Well, everything costs, right? There's not a lot of us that know the entire path of the packet. So understanding that is a resilience. And so when you think about it, this is the complete resilience framework. You got to address all these different things. And the one thing I will encourage everyone is when you're thinking about your resilience framework, there is a partnership between it. Go back to the foundational. A lot of times I'll say defense in depth. A lot of us old school guys have been around, and we started there, and we've started using MITRE, and we started using NIST and GDP, all these different compliance things, zero trust, you name it, it's out there. But it really all goes back to defense in depth and treating your network as one organism and getting that data out to outcome. Understanding your data type so that you can be a resilient system, because you need to break down the internal silos. I don't know what's happened, but there is a trend that says, hey, look, well, I can't tell you how many times I'll go in and I'll talk to a company, and he'll say, oh, I don't talk to that guy. I'm like, why? That guy owns all the data. How do you, well, I just told him to give me the data. Well, that guy owns the data, so you might have a conversation with him, because you're always going to be behind the curve when something bad happens. Next slide. So when you think about it, so I know this is a busy slide, right? Come on, guys, it is a little busy. And I would recommend you to go in and download it. But this is a framework. And a lot of times people don't realize and say, hey, you can't do everything all at once. There is a maturity model. And this is, this is something I put together with some other people of what do you need to do first and to go to your maturity level? What are the things that you need to address? So I think they're going to post this on the website, so I would encourage all of you to download. It's a really good framework to say, hey, this is what I need to do first. Because, again, we try to do everything all at once, and we fail, right? Even though we have to do, but if you try to do everything all at once, it's not going to work, right? You have to bring the data in. You have to start somewhere, and you have to be able to define the known from the unknown.
Yeah, and so we really talk about the fact that you cannot solve a problem unless you know about a problem, right? That's pretty much a pretty easy axiom. And honestly, data visibility is key. I'll share with you a quick story. One of our customers, when the war in Ukraine broke out, they came to us and they said, we're really worried. We have assets, we have plants inside of the Ukraine, and we are afraid that they may be being under attack, right? Under cyber attack. Can we bring all of our data into Splunk, all the stuff we don't bring into Splunk today? Because they followed the same mantra that I used to follow when I built SOCs, and that was, I wanted to focus on high density, high value, low volume data, right? Because vendors charge for volume and transactions per second and gigabytes per day and things of that nature. So we always focused on that high density, high density, low volume data, and left the high volume, low density data on the cutting room floor. Well, this company came to us and said, can we bring all the data into Splunk? Because we're not seeing anything, but we're worried. We're really concerned. And of course, being Splunk the partner we are, we said, sure, bring it all in. We'll figure it out later on licensing. We don't worry about it. Just bring it to our cloud. And within just 3 to 4 hours, they found 4 separate attacks, ongoing attacks from Russian threat actors. So just to let you know, what the lesson for me was, really good hackers don't live in that low volume, high density data. They're not going to make noise. They're not going to try to do password, brute force attacks. They live in that high volume, low density data, and so you really do need visibility to all the data, or at least have the ability to search it when you have a concern to find those highly skilled threat actors. So we talk about that visibility is key, needs to be continuous. We talk about consolidating in one platform, and even if it can't be consolidated in one platform, access to it, the ability to search it from a single console is very important. And then again, people, process, technology integrated into an IR platform, automation of the known. So we can automate things that we know about. We can't automate the things that we don't. I was once asked a couple of years ago if I thought there would ever be a lights out SOC because of all this automation that people are investing in. And my answer was, I tell you what, there'll be a lights out SOC when the hackers are lights out. As long as there's a human on the other end of that keyboard, even with all the AI technology that people are utilizing today, you have to have a human on our side of the keyboard to thwart those attacks. So.
Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. One of the things that we talk about is resilience of design, right? So data first, understanding your ecosystem, understanding your tools, but don't think in silos. Think of it as an ecosystem, all data, right? A little while ago, I did this for a client, and he wanted me to do the cyber. Well, again, we talked about everything is cyber, everything is data, right? And so I wanted to look at it from an ecosystem way, and I wanted to be able to bring it in. And I tend to at this time, I use CIS and NIST to be able to tell the story. And he goes, oh my God, this is I've never had anybody look at this as an ecosystem. He was the CISO. And so he turned this into a poster, and he put it at all of his sites, and he said, hey, before you want to buy something, bounce your capability off of this, right, as a poster. And he goes, and he ended up starting saving money because, for simple examples, is, again, as a cyber guy, everybody will tell you that there is a thing called tech debt. Right? I always say a lot of times people go to RSA, they go to, Black Hat or whatever, and it's like, it's Walmart. Like they go and just buy more and more because everybody's looking for the easy button. And a lot of times I'll come back and I'll say, you already have that capability, right? You got it because you're bought in silos. I like to use the example of Cisco ICE, right? Cisco ICE does NAC, right? It does it by default, right? A lot of times but the network guys buy it. And again, we all don't share with everybody else. We're not looking at it from an ecosystem. And so next thing you know, cyber gets a call and says, hey, look, I need a NAC solution. And so instead of looking internally, we go externally and we buy something new. And now you have competing things. If you've ever looked on a network and ever said, hey, look, I want to see what the bandwidth is on a network, cyber actually uses about 60 to 70% of the bandwidth on the network, right, and your infrastructure. And so what I like to do is, I don't take cyber, I was like, man, we need to do less tools, not more tools. I need to understand what's in my environment and do capability mapping, because the more tools I have, the more services I have, the more I have to defend. And there's more money I got to spend. All right, so I want to use my Splunk platform basically to bring all that data in and start doing capability mapping and understand those applications, because I need to understand the network, and I need to define the network. And once I define it, a lot of times when we talk about in cyber, first in, first out, well, take it to the next step. If I can simplify my network, if I can optimize my network, I can do less with my network, right, with more tooling. And a lot of times when you do tools, a lot of times people will say, well, I only use 10% of the capability. Well, why don't we increase that? All right? A lot of times you got to look at the capabilities of the tools. And so when I did this, he was like, oh my God, this is great. And he was able to turn some things off. And so he was able to reduce risk, and he was able to address threat, and it also saved him time, money on time, energy, and money. And the thing is by bringing it all into Splunk, he was able to see all that, because he was able to say, hey, well, I only have 3 users over here using this tool, and I have 15 of them, they all over here, and they're all it has the same capability. So let me determine which one I need to turn off. All right, because I need to, again, what he was talking about earlier is like, nobody has an unlimited budget, right? So we need to optimize what we have, all right?
Well, I'll tell you funny, so in my past life, there was a time we actually did really well in a quarter, and the board of directors came down and gave us an extra, well, I should say the president came into my office and said, $10 million in capital. I'm like, Christmas in July, that's amazing. Because we have $10 million in capital to spend in addition to the budget that we've already allocated. So I went to my team, and I had 6 vice presidents working for me, and I said, great, we have $10 million. Let's take a lot of the projects that we had for next year, let's move it to this year, because we actually have funds. And about a day later, every one of my vice presidents came into my office and said, we can't spend any of it. And I was like, excuse me? You guys are always begging for money, and now you're telling me you can't spend it. Can't spend it because our OpEx was maxed out. We couldn't take another dollar of depreciation. We couldn't take any engineering hours to put against implementing any of these technologies. So tool proliferation and tool fatigue is something that's real, and so I always encourage all of my customers really to take a look at what you're using and how you're using it and what value you're getting from it. Real quick, just to touch on AWS, the Better Together story. If you look at how AWS, I think you all know Splunk and AWS have been very close partners for a very long time. The majority of our workload in software as a service, Splunk as a cloud service, resides in AWS. So we're very, very tightly integrated with them. It's too small to read each individual box, but the reason why we showed this is on areas like identity and access management, detection and response, network application protection, data protection, and GSC reporting, we complement each other very well. There's a lot of work that the advisory team is doing, as well as some of the industry advisors that work with their Splunk peers, their AWS peers, to work together and produce outcomes for our business outcomes for our customers that only Splunk and AWS can provide. If you look at SIM and SOAR, which are 2 of our core capabilities around security, we don't compete with AWS, we're partners with them, right? So I just think the mapping is a very interesting story.
What I like about the last slide and this slide is like a lot of times when we buy product in silos, right? And again, if you don't get anything else from this, is like understanding you got to treat your environment like a living, breathing organism. You can't, everything is connected now, and being able to, like with the AWS slide that you saw, a lot of times it's bought by cloud, it's by infrastructure, right? A lot of times the cyber guys or infrastructure guys, they may not even know that they have all those capabilities, right? A lot of times you get it as a platform. It's just how they buy. You get a lot of these tools, and again, there is no single tool that does everything. But what you use the best in what you have as a defense in depth, resilient message, right? It's resilience by design. Use what I have. If I'm getting this product over here that's free, that does MFA or whatever. Like, why don't I want to use it, right? How do I want to be a part of that conversation? I got to monitor it. I've got to be able to address it, right? Anyway, I have all these tools because I see everything. I always say, like, in cyber, we're the data gods. We see everything, right? But we don't share all that knowledge across the playing field. We need to communicate among ourselves, right? It's not just a cyber problem. A lot of times I'll come to these meetings and I'll have go to a client, and one guy will sit there and say, well, that's not my problem. And I turn around, I'm like, it absolutely is your problem. Resilience is an everybody problem. All right, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to defend your net, whether it's cyber going and looking or you securing it at the data source. It's an everybody problem. All right, you can't just sit there and say, hey, well, my workload's too hard, right? Well, wait a minute, like you actually have stuff. You have a responsibility, because if you don't do what you have, anybody's ever seen companies get hit by ransomware or any other DDoS, like DDoS is on the rise. When companies get hit, it's an everybody problem, right? Because there's people's jobs on the line, right? So I always say, like, when you start thinking about like AWS, they provide a lot of stuff in their AWS marketplace that you can leverage, but a lot of times people don't know, right? Because we get so caught up in operations. We're literally, when I mentor people, and I do that a lot on the side, because I love the fact that I'm in a job where this is my hobby, but it's also my passion, right? I get to help people, and it doesn't cost anybody a dime. And I always say, hey, look, you should spend 90% of your time on operations, but 10% is tomorrow. If you're not addressing 10% tomorrow, eventually you're going to be behind, all right? Because you're just running in circles. And so this is a really good, take a look at the AWS marketplace, see what some of that do some capability mapping, and so that you can have a resilient system.
So we're going to share a couple stories around some industry use cases. First one is near and dear to my heart because it's about beer. And most of us like to go to the bar at the end of the day and maybe have a glass or two of beer. And so this is about Heineken. And you don't think about how hard it is to get that beer to the bar to dispense to be sold to you, right? But in Heineken's case, it's a seismic amount of technology. If you think about all the OT environments they have to operate to actually make the beer, then they have to package the beer, then they have to transport the beer, then it has to actually get to the bar. And they operate in over 70 different countries. And if any one of their 5 foundational integration platforms go down, it halts the entire process, right? So for them, having end-to-end visibility is absolutely key. So they're looking for reliability around the clock. They're looking for ensure they have end-to-end visibility and that they can monitor all the way from the minute they take the grain into the factory to the minute it's served at a bar, that the process is managed, monitored, and watched over and ensure that it actually works.
And so what do you need for beer, right? You need money, right? So you want to protect your money, right? So a lot of times when we think about this, is like when we think about this, I spend a lot of time in the FSI. I kind of like their data. I love large data nets. It's again, this is my hobby, and I love it, understanding all that.
You have a very interesting hobby there.
I know, I'm a nerd, right? But understanding how that works, right? So a lot of times we talk about our businesses, right? Every one of us has an industry. Right? Hey, we have retail, we have financial, we have manufacturing, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I always tell people, like, there is a horizontal and then there is a vertical, right? As you reach as your maturity model. So the horizontal is stuff that we all have to address, right? Data is data. A router is a router, a switch is a switch, a server is a server, right? That's how we put applications on top. But all those are like common use cases across anywhere you go, right? You're always going to have those things, right? When you start getting into maturity, when you start getting into IoT, OT, and some of those things, that's when you start going into the vertical in the industry, right? There are in the FSI community, there is they're bound by a lot of regulatory requirements. The FCC came out with a huge amount, and so that's when you start getting into that vertical and understanding that data. Transactional data, like for us, a lot of times we're trained our cyber guys on source, destination, application, DNS, port and protocol, right? That's how we start looking at it, because we look at the packet and we start investigating. When you start looking at transactional data, it's totally different. I don't know if anyone's ever done that. When you think about a point of sale, it gives you the address, and the address of where you had the transaction and where it's going. And inside of it, there's a bunch of different codes, right? Which you have to go to MasterCard or Visa and whatever to pull, right? And we've automated a lot of that, so you don't have to do it. You can just download it off of Splunk base and whatever. But the thing is, it's totally different. So it took the cyber guys by storm. Again, we go back to the right skill set to the right outcome. Right? When you're looking at the data, if they don't know what they're looking at, cyber guys, we're all the same. We're egoists. We don't like to ask questions. So we're like, oh, well, I'm not going to look at that. Or I'll put it as a low priority because I'm going to look at something else. All right? And then what happens is something happens, and then now your company's in trouble. All right? So understanding that you have the horizontal and then you have the vertical. There's things that we can all do together that is the same across all your verticals. Across the horizontal. Then think about the maturity as you go to the vertical. Next slide.
So what do you need to buy beer with the money you just protected at BEA? Well, our friends at Puma are going to provide us shoes, because most bars, no shoes, no service, right? So Puma is another one of our customers, and they have 45 e-commerce sites with different brands, different types of products that they sell. And they estimated they had one downtime for a very short amount of time, and it cost them over $108,000. So downtime is really, really critical to them. And this is similar across almost every retail business who has a network presence. So the ability to identify an issue in a very short amount of time is key and critical to them. So before they were saying some of these issues take hours and hours and hours for them to figure out which component of this large infrastructure system that provides that website. But by utilizing capabilities and instrumenting those capabilities so they have visibility to every component or part of that, what was required to deliver that website in a timely fashion, allows them to troubleshoot now those incidents in 10, 15 minutes, eliminating some of that cost that they get, and honestly, brand reputation, because our customers out there for retail, if you go to their website and it doesn't work, they likely aren't going to try it again. They're likely going to move on to a different product and buy something else. So the impact to brand recognition, adoption, and sales is absolutely tremendous. So we really need to focus on maintaining customer goodwill. Commerce site performance has to be addressed. It's got to be speedy. It's got to be fast, and really to provide that enhanced customer experience overall.
So what does all this really mean, right? It's the outcome-based approach, right? What am I trying to accomplish, right? In cyber, again, we see everything, right? But to get everything, I need to have partnerships with the rest of the business units, right? I need to have those conversations, right? I'm not working in isolation. If I'm working in isolation, I'm behind the power curve, right? I need to be able to get everything. I always say people don't communicate, so I use tools to facilitate communication, right? Getting everybody into a platform. Right, but I also need to define everything, and I need to get value everything. Nobody has an endless budget, right? But the attacks are coming in totally different nowadays, right? You think about supply chain, insider threat. Like a lot of times we all know Snowden in here, right? Look at what he did, right? Look at private manning and some of the things. Those are in the DoD space, but they have the same challenges. Espionage is a real thing. All right, and being able to understand it, but a lot of times we're so focused on the known because we haven't been flexible enough. When you think about resilience and resilience by design, think about being flexible, not just with your network, but being able to talk among yourselves and understand the data, and then simplify and optimize some of your tools. How do we do this? Like when you think about this, it's like foundational visibility, priorities. You guys see this slide. I'm not going to go into it because you guys, there's nobody in here that I'm not speaking the right way, right? You guys all understand we all have the same challenges. Am I right? Raise your hands. Anybody? Are you even paying attention? All right? I noticed that nobody laughed at our jokes, but I'm a nerd by heart, so I'm not funny. So just go with me.
I laugh.
But understanding that, whatever you do when you walk away from here, it's not about Splunk, it's not about AWS, it's by resilience by design. Think about a plan and think about an outcome. There's very few companies that have ever actually gone there, right? And so I'll turn it over to you.
The other thing I'll say is, just remember, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Every company that I talk to is somewhere on this journey. And I guess what we're trying to tell you is that, operating, I love coming to reInvent because it's not just a security event or it's not just a observability event. It really talks about the ability to transform your business through cloud services and cloud capabilities, right? And I love that message that this is not about just working in security as a silo anymore. The CISO has got to talk to the CTO today if they're ever going to achieve digital resilience. And so if you look at this path here, you'll see that these paths line up. There's steps to resilience for both observability, IT ops, that type of environment, and the security team. Even though I'm a security guy for most of my career, if we don't reach across the aisle, we're never going to actually achieve digital resilience. And so for this, again, not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we really need, a lot of our customers are moving more and more workloads to the cloud. And as you do this, what we talk about is focusing on the foundational, making sure it's defined, and then moving to the optimized state.
Well, we go back into that message of the horizontal and the vertical, right? There's a maturity state. Right? I mean, we all have different people that address different things. Every one of us have our own org chart, and sometimes we have big teams and we have small teams. But we need to understand, I always tell people, when you have a small team, it's more automation, When you have a big team, it's more niched. Right, it just works that way, right? Because they, like a lot of times the banks have big budgets, and so they can hire a lot of different people that are very good at what they do. When you're a smaller company, like especially in manufacturing or whatever, you have smaller teams, so you have to look at your data and define your data to actually be more in automation, right? Because you just don't have enough time to look at everything, right? And the thing is that a lot of times what I do, I actually do like a lot of the smaller companies because they're more optimized, right? A dollar's a dollar, right? It's not like I don't have $10 for every dollar. I need to be more optimized, so I need to do more with less, right? And I found them that a lot of times that they're more mature, but when they become more mature is because they follow this, they followed a roadmap, right? They need to understand by resilience by design. Right? I get so frustrated sometimes. They're like, well, define resilience. Like, I don't know. That's the CISO problem. I was like, no, it's an everybody problem, right? You talk to CTOs, and most of the time they'll tell you resilience is my problem. Right? They have to recover. CISO is the outcome. They're the ones that are like they're the guys that are seeing the problem and they're feeding the data back. Right? But if you build at the date of ingestion at the beginning, as you build out your products and you build it by security by design, right? But by incorporating security as a outcome, which is the outcome-based approach, right? How many times have we all been in there where somebody throws something on our network and we didn't even know, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, and they're like, well, why didn't you see that? Well, nobody told me, right? I have to go, I use consolidation area, I use data to monitor my network. If you put something on my network and I don't know, well, how am I supposed to see it? I worked a case a while ago. I have a little bit of time, so around the elections a long time ago, and I was on the call with like the FBI and the mayor and the governor and all this other stuff. This is when I worked for the government, and they were talking about they're yelling at the MSSP, and the MSSP was sitting there going, and I went and I looked. And I said, well, wait a minute, stop for a minute. And they're like, what? I said, you turned on all these servers. You never told your MSSP that you had them on, right? So how are they supposed to defend you? You never told, the IT guys never actually told, you turned on all these electric servers that had all this data in it, and nobody was monitoring it. So is it really the MSSP's fault? Is it really, like, we all have to work together, right, to be a resilient system. You have to have a good, solid change management system. Everybody needs a better together story. One of the reasons why I like the AWS and Splunk is because we build that out as an outcome. It's already embedded, right? We already know how to talk to each other. So we bring all that together. And so biggest takeaway, right? When you think about this, as you go on your cloud journey, as you go on your resilient journey, or if you're security by design journey, be a better together story. Don't think in isolation, because I guarantee you, and I will tell you, I've done red team, purple, blue, it doesn't really matter. I will tell you that I've been able to use those same techniques, the fact that people don't talk to each other, against them. Right? That's really what a hacker does. He'll know your network. A lot of times people talk about ransomware and like, oh my God, ransomware. Well, a lot of people don't realize is that ransomware is C2 activated, and a lot of times they'll know your network. They have to know 65 to 75% of your network or your crown jewels before they ever activate. Otherwise, the risk is too high for them, because they're taking a risk by activating the ransomware, right? They're on a list as soon as they do that. And you guys all seen in the news, right, what's happened. And so they're going to, if they don't feel like they've got everything, and if you're not going to pay out, they're not going to do it. But there are simple controls that you can do. You can use GPOs. You can do segmentation. I'm a big zero trust guy. Again, I came from the government. Like, we do that by default, right? So I would tell you, like, biggest takeaway from this thing is get everything into a single platform, talk among yourselves, understand your data, optimize your network, and just break down the silos internally.
Yeah, so just to bring it home, thank you very much for attending the session today. We do have a large booth with demos and ongoing presentations. If you want to this obviously wasn't a product talk. That was what the design of this was. We were hoping to share with you some messaging around what we see, what good looks like when it comes to security and security programs and achieving resiliency across the board. But if you have any interest in seeing demos of product or seeing how we actually achieve this in real time, real life, please visit us at the Tech Expo, and we look forward to seeing you. If you have any questions, we'll be around for a little bit.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.